My husband once dragged me into a sterile backstage corridor during a lavish finance gala, threw divorce papers onto the table, and said coldly, "You're nothing but a high-end maid who serves drinks." When I walked out to the main lobby, my mother raised her champagne as if she agreed while my brother stared silently at the floor. They thought that night would bury me forever. But 3 years later, that same man walked into Manhattan's most powerful hotel, begging to meet the mysterious chairman behind the empire, never realizing the woman he once threw away was standing right in front of him. This story is about justice that took 3 years to arrive. Before we start, leave me a quick comment. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have believed in you? Yes or no? I read every one. Just a note. Some details have been adjusted for storytelling, but the message about dignity and resilience is what truly matters. At 27, I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom with my clipboard, a mid-level manager, invisible to the 200 financial elites, celebrating my husband's milestone, and I watched him fall in love with someone else on stage. November 2021. Friday night. The 32nd floor of the Legacy Hotel in Manhattan glowed under amber chandelier light, each crystal drop refracting wealth into geometric patterns across marble floors. I had verified the temperature 3 times that afternoon, still 2 degrees too warm. The centerpiece at table 7 sat at the wrong angle. I noted it on my clipboard. Water pitchers needed refilling at tables 7, 12, and 18. My pen scratched across the page in tight, controlled strokes. Sterling Caldwell stood on stage in his tailored black suit, the 35-year-old hedge fund director, whose deep voice carried the kind of arrogant confidence that made investors reach for their checkbooks. He was my husband, had been for 3 years. Tonight he was celebrating Apex Capital crossing the $100 million milestone, and I was the logistical ghost making sure no one's champagne glass stayed empty long enough to notice the woman taking notes in the corner. Apex Capital crossed the $100 million milestone today, Sterling said, his voice filling every corner of the ballroom. This isn't luck, it's vision. Applause erupted, 200 hands clapping in synchronized admiration. I watched Table 7's water pitcher dip below the refill line. Table 7 needs more water. My husband is delivering a landmark speech, and my immediate concern is a shortage of water at Table 7. That was my job. Mid-level hotel manager. Professional invisible woman. I coordinated events for people who would never remember my name, ensured their celebrations ran so smoothly they never had to think about the mechanics behind the elegance. Tonight I was doing it for my own husband's triumph, and he had not looked at me once since the doors opened at 7. Tonight we celebrate not just capital, Sterling continued, his hand sweeping across the audience like a conductor before an orchestra. We celebrate the people who believed when no one else would. More applause. I made another note. Adjust lighting in northwest corner, too dim for the photographers circling the perimeter like well-dressed sharks. I told myself I was proud of him. I told myself this was what partnership looked like. One person in the spotlight. One person making sure the spotlight stayed on. I told myself these things because the alternative was admitting that I had spent 3 years married to a man who introduced me to his colleagues as my wife. She works in hospitality, with the same tone someone might say, my wife, she collects ceramic frogs. Then Sterling extended his hand toward the wings. A woman stepped onto the stage. Celine Mercer, 31 years old. Crimson gown that fit like a threat. Diamond necklace catching the chandelier light and throwing it back in sharp, deliberate flashes. She wore the smile of a woman who knew exactly where she stood and exactly how much space she was allowed to take. I lowered my clipboard. My heart stopped. Then it restarted with a fundamentally different rhythm. This is the person who believed in me from the very beginning, Sterling said, and his voice changed, softened, warmed, became something I had never heard directed at me. The one who saw potential when the spreadsheets showed only risk. He looked at her the way men look at women in movies, the way I thought he had looked at me once 3 years ago before I realized I had imagined the entire thing. Some partnerships are professional, Sterling said, pausing, his eyes still locked on Celine. Some are, another pause calculated heavy, irreplaceable. The applause was deafening. I gripped the edge of my clipboard until my knuckles turned bone white. He never used that voice with me. Not once in 3 years of marriage. Not even on our wedding night. You know that moment when you realize your entire life has been a performance for an audience that was never watching you. When you understand that you have been playing the role of wife, of partner, of believer, and the man you married has been reading from a completely different script the entire time. I was having that moment in the corner of the grand ballroom with a clipboard and a note about Table 7's water shortage. Solene placed her hand on Sterling's arm. He covered it with his own. 200 people watched them like they were witnessing a proposal. Maybe they were. Maybe that was exactly what this was, a public claiming, a declaration, a rewriting of history that erased me from the narrative entirely. I scanned the room on instinct. Professional habit. Check the VIP section. Ensure no one is uncomfortable. Ensure everyone has what they need. Table 3, front row, VIP section. My mother, Vivienne Ashford. 58 years old, restaurant chain owner, cream blazer and pearl collar that cost more than my monthly salary. She sat with her champagne flute, raised her posture perfect, her face holding the kind of terrifying serenity that came from decades of social performance. For one split second, our eyes met across the ballroom. She glanced at Sterling and Solene on stage, then back to me, then deliberately, unmistakably, she looked away, sipped her champagne, and applauded. That glance lasted less than 2 seconds, but it contained an entire verdict. She knew, they all knew, and no one warned me. My husband was falling in love on stage, my mother was applauding, and I was holding a clipboard. I stood there with my pen hovering over the page, the note about Table 7's water shortage still incomplete, and I understood with absolute freezing clarity that the worst part of tonight had not even happened yet. Sterling and Solene descended the stage together, his hand on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd like she was the guest of honor. Like she was the reason for the celebration, like she was the one who had believed in him from the beginning. I gripped my clipboard until the metal clip bit into my palm. In 30 minutes, Sterling would pull me into a backstage corridor. There would be papers I had never seen and a lawyer I had never met. But right now, in this moment, I was still his wife. Still the woman in the corner with the clipboard, still invisible. I made one final note: Table 7, water refilled, centerpiece adjusted, temperature still 2 degrees too warm. Nothing I could do about the temperature. Nothing I could do about anything at all. 30 minutes after the applause died, Sterling's hand closed around my elbow and pulled me into the sterile backstage corridor where the fluorescent lights hummed and his lawyer was already waiting. The shift from marble and chandelier light to industrial linoleum felt like falling through a trap door. Sterling's grip was firm, professional, the way you might guide a vendor toward a service exit. He did not look at me. Attorney Kurt Brennan, 50s, black leather folder, perfectly pressed suit. I had never met this man, never heard his name. But he stood there like he had been waiting for hours, and from the way Sterling walked toward him without hesitation, I understood this meeting had been scheduled long before tonight. Chloe, Sterling said, his voice devoid of the warmth he had used on stage, I need you to sign this tonight. Chloe. He called me Chloe. My name is Liora, but Sterling had decided 3 years ago that Chloe sounded softer, more approachable. I stopped correcting him after the first year. What is this? Brennan opened the folder. Papers slid across the metal utility table. Divorce papers, Sterling said. Uncontested asset division. I looked at the papers. Neat columns. Legal terminology. Signatures already prepared, his lawyer's, his, and a blank line waiting for mine. The date at the top was 3 months old. August 15th, 2021. 3 months. He had filed these papers 3 months ago. Solene secured a $10 million investment for Apex Capital, Sterling said, his tone shifting into clinical efficiency. The terms require me to be legally single before we marry. This has been in motion for months. I need you to stop wasting time and sign. I stared at him. He stared back with the expression of a man waiting for a subordinate to finish a task. Look at yourself, he said, his voice dropping into something colder. You're just a high-end maid. You serve tables and embarrass my status. Look at Solene, she makes in one night what you earn in an entire year. Brennan cleared his throat. Mr. Caldwell has also prepared documentation showing that all operational reports filed under your name for the past 3 years have been reassigned. Author credits now reflect Mr. Caldwell's direct contributions. I looked at Brennan, then at Sterling. You erased my name. It was not a question. Sterling picked up a red pen from the table. The exact type I had used to sign operational approvals for 3 years, the same pen I had used tonight to note Table 7's water shortage, and placed it in front of me. Sign it, he said. I looked at the red pen. The same pen I had used to approve 3 years of operational excellence. And I understood that some weapons are designed to look harmless. My hand reached for the pen. I do not remember signing. I remember the sound of ink on paper. I remember Brennan collecting the documents. I remember Sterling turning and walking away without another word, his shoes clicking down the corridor toward the ballroom where Celine was waiting. I stood there holding the red pen. Then I walked toward the main lobby. The marble floors gleamed under chandelier light. Guests lingered in elegant clusters. I moved through them like a ghost invisible again. My mother blocked the exit. Vivian Ashford stood in the center of the lobby in her immaculate cream blazer and pearl collar, her face holding that terrifying serenity that came from decades of social performance. She was not surprised to see me. She had been waiting. You knew, I said, and my voice cracked at the edge. She tilted her head, studied me the way someone might examine a stain on expensive fabric. Had I known, she said softly, as if commenting on the weather, I would never have let you marry Sterling in the first place. A daughter who only knows how to do menial work, dragging this family's reputation through the mud. Behind her, my brother stood with his eyes glued to the floor. Beckett Ashford, 31 years old, restaurant co-manager, the brother who used to walk me home from school. He stood there now in his expensive suit hands in his pockets, incapable of looking at me. Beckett, I said. He did not look up. Stop clinging to your brother-in-law, my mother said. He has moved on. So should you. My eyes stung. I forced myself not to blink. Fine, I said, and my voice was so steady I barely recognized it. I walked past her toward the reception desk. My mother called my work menial. My brother said nothing. My husband handed me a pen. And I was the one who had apologized for existing. Behind me, I heard her whisper to Beckett, "This is better. That girl was dragging the entire family down." I did not turn around. But I heard Beckett shift, heard his shoes pivot on marble. I knew without looking that he had turned to watch me go, guilty recognition finally crossing his face too late to matter. I reached the reception counter, pulled my hotel security badge from my pocket. The plastic was warm from being pressed against my body all night, the lanyard frayed from 3 years of use. I placed it on the counter. No rush, no trembling, just a clean release of something that no longer belonged to me. Then I walked through the glass doors into the November night. The cold air hit my face like a slap. I did not hail a cab to a nice hotel. I did not call a friend. I walked 3 blocks to a budget hotel near Penn Station and booked the cheapest room available. Room 112, $49 a night. Stained carpet, window that did not quite close, radiator that clanked like a dying engine. Not because I lacked money, but because I needed to remember exactly where I stood to know exactly where I was going. At 2 in the morning, in a $28 room near Penn Station, I did not cry. I opened my laptop and logged into my work email before Sterling could revoke my access. Room 112 smelled like mildew and decades of transient desperation. Weak yellow light from a desk lamp that flickered every 30 seconds. Muffled subway rumble through walls so thin I could hear someone coughing 3 rooms away. The desk was scratched plastic, the kind that had absorbed 1,000 spilled drinks and cigarette burns. My laptop, 5 years old screen hinge held together with electrical tape sat in the center like an altar. I logged in. My work email loaded. 300 unread messages. I ignored all of them and went directly to the shared operational drive. The repository I had built over 3 years. Every metric I had calculated. Every workflow I had engineered. Every weekend I had sacrificed to make Sterling's events run like precision machinery. I opened the first file. Author Sterling Caldwell. I opened the second file. Author Sterling Caldwell. I opened the third, fourth, fifth. Sterling Caldwell. Sterling Caldwell. Sterling Caldwell. Every single document, every single report, every single operational analysis that had carried my name for 3 years now bore his signature at the top. He did not just humiliate me, he systematically erased me from history before casting me out. My hands shook, but my fingers never stopped clicking. 3 years of operational excellence. My metrics, my workflows, my weekends, all bearing his name now. Screenshot, click, every single file, every single theft. I saved them to a hidden folder on my desktop, compressed the folder, uploaded it to 3 different cloud services under 3 different email addresses. Sent copies to myself at an old university account Sterling did not know existed. By the time I finished, it was 2:47 a.m., and I had documented every single piece of intellectual property he had stolen. I closed the laptop, then I pulled out my phone and stared at my contact list. Most of the names belonged to people who would not answer. Friends who had slowly drifted away during my marriage. Colleagues who reported to Sterling. Family members who had applauded while my mother called me a stain. But there was one name at the bottom of the list. Lawrence Garrison. I pressed dial at exactly 3 in the morning. He answered on the second ring. "Are you all right?" His voice was instantly alert, deep, protective. The voice of a man who had been my father's closest friend for 30 years, the police chief who had stood at my father's funeral and told me if I ever needed anything, I should call. I had not called, not once in 3 years, until now. "I need the name of a brilliant lawyer," I said, "the one my father left behind." Silence on the other end. Not confusion, recognition. "Thomas," Garrison said finally, and his voice carried weight. "You call Conrad Whitfield. Your father said if you ever dialed this number for that name, things are critical. Have you ever watched someone steal your identity, one spreadsheet cell at a time, knowing they planned it months before they ever said goodbye? Have you ever sat in a room that cost less than a dinner? You used to coordinate and realized that the only people who prepared for your survival were the ones who were already dead." "Thank you," I said. "Call him now," Garrison said. "He is expecting you." The line went dead. I stared at my phone. Then I dialed the number Garrison had sent via text 30 seconds later. The phone rang once. "I know about you," a voice said immediately. "Your father told me, and he prepared something for you. Conrad Whitfield, 52 years old, M&A attorney." He answered at 3:15 in the morning as if he had been sitting beside his phone waiting for this exact call. "What did he prepare?" My throat was tight. "A trust fund from your maternal grandmother," Conrad said. $180,000, under your sole name, established when you were 18, held in a blind trust under your grandmother's maiden name. Your husband has no idea it exists." I sat in absolute silence. The radiator in the corner clanked like it was dying. Someone down the hall slammed a door. A siren wailed past on the street below. "Your father knew," Conrad continued, his voice steady and calm. "He knew that anyone who married into that kind of wealth might one day need an escape route no one else could see. He made me promise that if you ever called, I would give you 2 things: the truth and the tools." $180,000, I repeated. Liquid, accessible, invisible. My father died 3 years ago. But somehow at 3:15 in the morning, in a room that smelled like mildew and defeat, he reached through time and handed me a weapon. "What do I do?" I asked. "Whatever you need to do," Conrad said. "I am your attorney now, not his, yours, and I have been waiting for 3 years to say that." I thanked him, hung up, set the phone down on the scratched desk beside my laptop. Then I opened a blank document. Not to write about my grief, not to catalog my losses, not to draft angry letters I would never send. I opened it to draft an acquisition strategy. $180,000. 3 years of institutional hotel knowledge that no one knew belonged to me. Operational expertise in event coordination, guest services, logistics management. A reputation that had been erased from official records, but still lived in the memory of every vendor, every staff member, every guest who had ever attended an event I had orchestrated. It was enough to buy into a dying hotel. And I knew exactly which one. 4 months after I left the Legacy Hotel, with nothing but a clipboard and a plan, my brother called my new number for the first time. And the way he said my name told me he was drowning. The hotel I knew about was called the Ashford. 60 rooms, midtown location, distressed debt, perfect bones beneath decades of neglect. I had spent 4 months building the acquisition strategy in my sparse studio apartment. Bare walls, second-hand furniture, a desk facing the window where I worked 16-hour days. March 2022, Sunday evening, 8 o'clock. My phone rang with a number I had not deleted, but had never expected to see illuminated on my screen again. Beckett. I answered on the third ring. "Hey," he said, and his voice sounded raw, hollow, like something had been scraped out of him and left to echo. "I'm calling because—" I didn't know who else to turn to. He never prefaced conversations with me like this before. Never called asking for help. Never admitted vulnerability. I sat upright in my chair, instantly alert. "What happened?" "The restaurant chain is bleeding out," he said. "Mom lost 40% of top-line revenue over the last 2 years. 3 branches are facing imminent closure. She is drowning in financial crisis, and absolute fear is driving her decisions now." I said nothing, just listened to him breathe on the other end of the line. "Sterling approached her," Beckett continued. "Wants her to invest in his fund as a strategic partner. She is seriously considering it. I warned her not to sign anything. She won't listen to me." My heart started to thud violently in my chest, but my voice stayed completely flat. "When exactly did Sterling approach her?" Silence. Then quiet. 8 months ago. 8 months ago. July, August 2021. Well before the November anniversary gala, before the divorce papers, before everything. I stood up and walked to the window. Looked down at the street below where people moved through their Sunday evening routines, unaware that my entire understanding of the past year had just shifted. 8 months ago, I repeated. "Yeah," Beckett said. 8 months ago. The restaurant was failing, Sterling was circling, and I was still setting the table for our anniversary. He did not wait to discard me before finding a financial replacement. He lined up a guarantor for his fund before I ever saw divorce papers. Before he stood on that stage and introduced Solene with warmth he never gave his wife. Before his lawyer waited in the fluorescent corridor with documents dated 3 months prior. He was weaving a net, and my family was walking straight into it. "Listen to me," Beckett said, and his voice dropped. "Do not let Mom sign a single piece of paper with Sterling. I don't care what it takes. Don't let her do it." "You know Mom," I said. "She won't listen to a word I say. She called my life's work menial. She won't listen to you either." "I know," Beckett said, "but I had to call. I had to try." I waited. The silence stretched between us like a bridge neither of us wanted to cross. "Why are you really calling?" I asked. Another long silence. Then, "Because I've known for months that Sterling was targeting the family business. I watched it happen. I stayed silent out of fear, and guilt finally outweighed cowardice." There it was, the truth that had been sitting in the lobby the night I walked out with my security badge. The truth behind his eyes glued to the floor while Mother called me a stain. The truth that looked like a brother who loved his sister but loved his own safety more. "Thank you for calling," I said. I meant it. Not because he had helped, but because he had finally been honest. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know." I hung up, set the phone down on my desk, stared at the notes I had been taking during the call, my handwriting steady and precise despite the way my pulse hammered in my throat. "What do you call a man who plans your financial ruin before he even asks for a divorce? I call him predictable." I picked up my pen and wrote one more line in my notebook. Sterling intentionally selected victim family restaurant desperate for capital. This is proof of premeditation. Then I opened my laptop. Conrad had sent me a distressed asset list 2 weeks ago. Properties in financial distress across Manhattan. Hotels, restaurants, commercial real estate, all of them vulnerable, all of them bleeding. Sterling did not just cast me out. He was building a fraud scheme, targeting desperate businesses, offering salvation through investment. And I needed to move faster than him. I scrolled through the list. There, the Ashford Hotel. 60 rooms, midtown location, built in 1924, original Art Deco fixtures. Prime real estate buried under decades of deferred maintenance and mounting debt. The property where my marriage had died 14 times. Not metaphorically, literally. 14 events I had coordinated at the Ashford during my 3 years with Sterling. 14 times I had walked those corridors, making sure every detail was flawless, while he took credit for operational excellence that bore my fingerprints. 14 times I had stood in the dilapidated service hallways and thought, "This hotel is dying and no one is trying to save it." Now it was on Conrad's list. Distressed debt, foreclosure imminent, owner desperate for any offer that kept the doors open. And I knew every inch of that building, every workflow, every inefficiency, every opportunity. I pulled up my acquisition strategy document. The one I had started at 3:15 in the morning in a room that cost less than dinner. $180,000 in hidden capital. 3 years of institutional knowledge Sterling thought he had erased. And a hotel that was waiting for someone who understood that saving it meant buying it first. 6 weeks after I signed divorce papers with a red pen, I sat across from a bank officer in a conference room that smelled like mildew and failure and told him I wanted to buy his worst mistake. The Ashford Hotel, 60 rooms, Midtown Manhattan, built in 1924 with Art Deco fixtures that had seen better decades. The property had been hemorrhaging money for 3 years and was 6 months from foreclosure. The boardroom where we sat had peeling wallpaper and a worn wooden table that looked like it had survived the Depression. Bank officer Philip Morgan sat across from me with graying temples and the skeptical expression of a man who had heard too many bad pitches. The current owner sat beside him in anxious silence, a 70-year-old man watching his family legacy circle the drain. Conrad Whitfield sat to my right, silent, observant, ready. I slid a 47-page analytical dossier across the table. Morgan opened it, flipped through the first 3 pages, then looked up at me. "You want to buy our distressed debt?" he asked. "With $180,000? "I'm not buying the real estate directly," I said. "I am purchasing your non-performing loan at a deep discount. Then I will convert it into equity through a restructuring agreement with the current owner. This is a distressed debt acquisition model, entirely legal, and you know it's your highest recovery yield." Morgan's eyebrows went up. Conrad gave a single sharp nod. Morgan went back to the dossier, flipped to page 12, then page 23. His expression shifted from skepticism to something closer to respect. "This analysis is thorough," he said slowly. "Occupancy trends, revenue per available room, comparable property valuations, operational inefficiencies mapped against industry benchmarks." He looked up. "How long have you been in hospitality asset management?" 3 years, I said. "But I know this property from the inside out better than anyone at this table." That was not arrogance, that was fact. I had coordinated 14 events at the Ashford during my marriage. I knew which rooms had plumbing issues, which floors had HVAC problems, which vendor contracts were bleeding money. I knew the front desk manager quit every 18 months because the owner refused to update the reservation system. I knew the restaurant kitchen had a ventilation problem that cost them their Michelin consideration in 2019. I knew this building the way you know a crime scene after you have walked it 100 times. Morgan flipped through more pages, slowed at the financial projections, the restructuring timeline, the comparable exit valuations. "Your recovery rate is 62 cents on the dollar," I said. "My offer gives you 58 cents. But I close in 30 days, and you stop paying carrying costs on a non-performing asset. Your alternative is foreclosure liquidation and maybe 40 cents after 18 months of legal fees." Morgan closed the dossier, looked at Conrad. "This is legitimate." "Entirely," Conrad said. Morgan looked at me, then at the current owner who nodded with the resignation of a man who had run out of options. "Then let's close this deal," Morgan said. "You want to know the difference between revenge and justice? Revenge is destroying what someone loves. Justice is buying it." Conrad pulled the contract from his briefcase. 23 pages. I had read every word 17 times. The signature line waited at the bottom of page 23. I picked up the pen. For 3 years, I had signed documents as Liora Caldwell. The name felt like a costume I had worn until it no longer fit. Sterling had called me Chloe because Liora was too sharp, too difficult to soften. But the woman signing this contract was neither Liora Caldwell nor Chloe. She was Vance, my grandmother's maiden name. The woman who had set aside money in a blind trust when I was 18, believing I was worth saving before I ever knew I needed saving. I signed the contract slowly, deliberately. My hand did not shake. Vance, Morgan witnessed. Conrad notarized. The current owner signed the restructuring agreement with shaking hands and visible relief. I owned a hotel. Not legally, not yet, but operationally, financially, strategically. The building belonged to me the moment that ink dried. "Congratulations," Morgan said, extending his hand. I shook it. Then I stood and walked out of the boardroom while Conrad handled the final paperwork transfers. I walked through the third-floor hallways, past rooms with doors that needed replacing, down the stairs where the carpet was worn through to backing, into the main lobby where dust motes floated through weak afternoon light. The front desk was unmanned. A historical guest registry sat open on the counter, the kind of leather-bound book that old hotels kept for frequent stayers, a relic from an era when hospitality meant remembering names. I flipped it open. My chest tightened. Sterling Caldwell, room 214. 14 reservations over the past 2 years. Every single entry listed him with guest, not his wife, never his wife. 14 times. This property was not just distressed real estate. This was the crime scene. Some women burn their ex-husband's belongings. I bought the hotel where he betrayed me. Same energy, better ROI. I stood in the center of that dark, damp lobby, creaking floorboards beneath my feet, flickering sconces, throwing shadows across peeling wallpaper, the scent of mildew and decades of deferred maintenance thick in the air, and I laughed. Out loud. For the first time in 6 weeks. Bitter, sharp, completely unhinged laughter that echoed through the empty space and bounced off the Art Deco ceiling tiles. I had just purchased the very hotel where my marriage was sabotaged, and I was about to turn it into the foundation of an empire. The laughter kept coming. Tears tracked down my face. Not grief, not even rage anymore, just the pure, dark exhilaration of irony so perfect it felt like destiny. Conrad found me there 10 minutes later, still holding the guest registry, tears of laughter streaking my cheeks. He looked at the open page, saw the name written 14 times in neat hotel script. He looked up at me. How many, he asked. 14, I said. Conrad looked at the registry, then at me. Then he closed the book and handed it back without another word. The empire didn't build itself overnight. It took 28 months of no vacations, no dating, no explanations, and 7 distressed properties. I swallowed one bankruptcy at a time. January 2022. Property number 2. A boutique Brooklyn waterfront resort facing foreclosure. Same playbook. 47-page analysis. Non-performing loan purchase. Equity conversion through restructuring agreement. I slept in the construction office during renovations, learning building code violations at midnight, negotiating with contractors at dawn. March 2022. Property number 3. Historic commercial building in the financial district. The bank wanted it gone. I wanted the location. Conrad handled the paperwork while I mapped every tenant lease and calculated the exact cost of converting 12 floors of office space into boutique hotel suites. July 2022. Property number 4. Mid-size property near Union Square with structural issues that terrified other buyers. I hired an engineer who owed my father a favor. He found the problems. I found the solutions. The bank sold me the debt for 43 cents on the dollar. By December 2022, I owned 4 hotels and had not taken a single day off. Conrad sat across from me in my temporary office, a converted storage room in the basement of the Ashford, and reviewed the 5th acquisition proposal. Are you absolutely certain you want to decline the financial magazine profile? He asked. You're becoming a ghost story. Let them wonder, I said. The most mysterious person in the city holds the highest premium. I am not ready for them to see my face. He nodded, filed the rejection letter. No vacations, no dating, no explanations, just properties 5 through 7 waiting on the distressed asset list. January 2023. The financial press started using a name I had not given them. Chairman Vance, the woman who controlled a premier hospitality portfolio but refused all interviews, never appeared at industry events, and had no public photograph. Forbes requested a profile. I declined. They requested again. I declined again. The Wall Street Journal called me the ghost who owns Manhattan's best beds. The mystery drove valuations higher on every property I touched. Revenge is a building you construct in silence, every brick laid, while they're looking elsewhere, every floor rising while they're sleeping, until one day they look up and realize you own the skyline. May 2023, property number 5, a converted warehouse in Long Island City with river views and zoning problems no one else wanted to solve. September 2023, property number 6, a pre-war gem in the West Village buried under decades of rent control litigation. February 2024, property number 7, the flagship, a 90-room property 2 blocks from Central Park, Art Deco masterpiece, the kind of hotel where presidents stayed and scandals were born. The previous owner had run it into the ground through incompetence and cocaine. The bank was grateful someone competent wanted the debt. I renovated it in 3 months, hired 200 staff, named it Vance Hotel Group headquarters. By May 2024, I employed 2,300 people and possessed a reputation that made Wall Street nervous. And according to Chief Garrison's monthly intelligence reports, Sterling Caldwell was losing his mind trying to get a meeting with me. Conrad walked into my office on a Tuesday afternoon with a printout of the latest email. 14th meeting request this year, he said, reading from the screen. Apex Capital seeks strategic partnership with Vance Group aligned values mutual growth opportunity. I looked up from the construction timeline I was reviewing. What did you reply? Same as always, Conrad said. Chairman Vance's schedule does not permit external investment discussions at this time. We wish you success in your endeavors. I smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a kind smile. The smile of a woman watching a man beg for capital from the wife he once called a high-end maid. Sterling had no idea, none of them did. The mysterious Chairman Vance, whose face had never appeared in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal or any industry conference, was the woman who used to stand in corners with a clipboard making sure Table 7 had enough water. Garrison's reports painted a picture of increasing desperation. Sterling's fund was stable but not growing. Soline's investment had bought him time but not momentum. He needed a major capital partner. He needed someone with real estate holdings and hospitality expertise. He needed Chairman Vance, and Chairman Vance kept politely declining his emails. You want to know how it feels to be invisible for 3 years and then suddenly own everything. It feels like patience finally collecting interest. He doesn't know, Conrad said, watching my expression. No, I agreed. He doesn't. When will you tell him? When it serves a purpose, I said. Right now his ignorance serves me better than his knowledge. Conrad filed the email with the other 13 rejected meeting requests. I went back to reviewing construction timelines. The empire was not built yet. 7 properties, 2,300 employees. But I was not done. There were still pieces to acquire, still debts to restructure, still buildings waiting to be saved by someone who understood that distressed assets were just opportunities no one else had the courage to touch. And then on a late afternoon in May 2024, with golden light bleeding across Central Park and into my corner office on the 42nd floor of Vance headquarters, Conrad walked through my door with an expression I had never seen on his face before. He carried a heavy cream envelope, the expensive kind, the kind used for wedding invitations. He laid it on my desk. He said nothing. He just looked at me. I opened the envelope. Inside was a venue booking request. Sterling Caldwell and Soline Mercer requested the Grand Ballroom at Vance Hotel Group flagship property for their wedding reception, November 15, 2024. Exactly 3 years to the day after I bought the Ashford Hotel and founded this empire from the ashes of my marriage. I opened the envelope while Conrad watched in silence, and the words I read made my hands go completely still. Venue booking request Grand Ballroom, November 15th. Bride and groom, Sterling Caldwell and Soline Mercer. Golden hour light bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Conrad's office on the 41st floor, turning Central Park into a grid of amber and shadow below us. I stood at his desk and read the prospectus twice. They want to book their wedding venue at your flagship property, Conrad said quietly. Sterling and that woman. The Grand Ballroom. A $2.3 million budget, November 15th. I set the envelope down on his mahogany desk. My movements were smooth, controlled. But my mind was calculating at a speed that made my pulse hammer in my throat. November 15th is the exact 3-year anniversary of our corporate founding, I said. Conrad's eyes narrowed. A coincidence? No. I picked up the prospectus again, read through the details. Full service reception for 400 high-profile guests. Premium catering package. Complete audiovisual system upgrade. Bar service with top-shelf selections. Live entertainment. Valet parking for 200 vehicles. They wanted Chairman Vance's most prestigious venue. They had no idea Chairman Vance was the woman Sterling had discarded 3 years ago in a fluorescent corridor with a red pen and divorce papers dated 3 months prior. The irony was so perfect it felt like architecture. What are you thinking? Conrad asked. I walked to the window, looked down at the park, the joggers on the paths, the tourists at the fountains, the children on the playgrounds, all of them moving through their lives unaware that 41 floors above them, a woman was designing a trap. The wedding isn't about romance, I said. It is a money laundering mechanism utilizing high-profile hospitality service expenses to wash $10 million of defrauded capital before federal authorities freeze her offshore accounts. Conrad tapped his pen against the mahogany desk. Once, twice, 3 times. If that's true, he said slowly, this is federal wire fraud territory. Are you certain you want to host this event? I turned back to face him. I want to draft a contract, I said, a very specific agreement. What do you call it when the man who called you a maid begs to rent your ballroom for $2 million? I call it poetry. I sat down across from Conrad and pulled the prospectus toward me, flipped to the payment schedule. They wanted to wire deposit immediately, 20% down. The rest in installments leading up to the event date. Solene chose November 15th with absolute intent, I said. She needs a massive event with exorbitant costs and clean corporate invoices. A wedding at a premier venue provides perfect paper trail. 2.3 million in hospitality expenses, all legitimate, all documented, all washing money that came from fraud. Sterling is the useful idiot, Conrad said. Sterling is always the useful idiot, I agreed. But Solene is the architect. She has been planning this for months, probably longer. The $10 million investment she made in his fund, that money is dirty, and she needs to clean it before federal authorities close the window. Conrad set his pen down. If you host this event knowing it is part of a money laundering scheme, you become complicit. Unless, I said, I designed the contract to protect myself while simultaneously ensuring their crimes are fully documented and irrevocably tied to their own signatures. Conrad leaned back in his chair, studied me with the expression of a lawyer who had spent 3 years watching a client transform from discarded wife into strategic operator. What do you want me to draft? An escrow clause, I said. Automatic forfeiture of all pledged collateral if any criminal incident occurs on site during the event. His eyebrows went up. Define the scope, he said. Any arrest, any federal intervention, any law enforcement action taken on the premises during the contracted event window. If the clause is triggered, the entire escrowed asset portfolio transfers to Vance Group ownership within 24 hours. No litigation required. Clean transfer. Conrad picked up his pen again, started taking notes. You are asking them to pledge collateral against their own criminal exposure, he said. If they sign this and then commit a crime at the event, you own everything they put in escrow. Correct. What assets are you requiring as collateral? Whatever Sterling values most, I said. His fund equity, his investment portfolio, real property if he has any. I want the contract structured so that signing it feels like standard event insurance but functions as a financial guillotine. Conrad wrote faster. They have to sign it voluntarily, he said. No coercion, no misrepresentation. The language has to be clear enough to survive legal challenge, but subtle enough that they don't realize what they are signing until it is too late. Can you draft that? Yes, he said. But you need them to actually trigger the clause. You need a criminal incident to occur on your premises during their event. That requires law enforcement coordination. I know. Do you have a plan? I looked out the window again. The sun was sinking lower, the shadows in the park growing longer. First, I said, I need to understand exactly who Solene Mercer is. Not the woman Sterling introduced on stage 3 years ago, the real person behind that name. You want to know the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is emotional. Justice is a contract with a clause they won't read until it is too late. Conrad turned to his computer and pulled up the contract template. How much time do we have? They want to book immediately, I said. Deposit due within 7 days. That gives us 1 week to draft the contract, embed the clause, and present it as standard venue agreement. 1 week, Conrad repeated. He bent over his keyboard and began to type. I sat in the chair watching the cursor move across his screen, watching the words appear, watching the trap take shape in legal language that would look innocuous to anyone who did not read contracts the way predators read prey. And I understood that from this exact moment the clock had begun to count down. Not for me, for them. They wanted to use my property to legitimize their fraud. I was going to let them try. But first I needed to understand exactly who Solene Mercer really was. The manila folder slid across the coffee shop table at 6 in the morning, and before I even opened it, Chief Garrison said 3 words that changed everything. Her real name. October 2024. Early morning before rush hour. A quiet corner booth in a coffee shop 3 blocks from police headquarters downtown. The kind of place cops went when they did not want to be cops for an hour. Garrison sat across from me in civilian clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, no badge visible. He looked like someone's uncle meeting for breakfast. But the folder he slid across the table was not breakfast conversation. I opened it. Mugshots, victim rosters, federal case files spanning 3 states in 5 years. Her real name is Sarah Higgins. Garrison said, his voice low and matter-of-fact in the way my father used to deliver intelligence, no ceremony, straight to the point. Wanted by the FBI for the 4th time. Chicago 2019, Miami 2021, Houston 2022. The exact same blueprint every time. I stared at the first mugshot. The woman looking back at me from the photograph had darker hair and a different expression. But it was unmistakably the same person who had stood on stage 3 years ago in a crimson gown while my husband introduced her as the woman who believed in him. Target high net worth, arrogant men, I said, reading the case summary. Get them into crypto or dummy investment funds, Garrison continued. Host massive gala event to wash the velocity of cash, then vanish before dawn. She is an assembly line. Chicago, Miami, Houston, now New York. I flipped through these pages. Victim after victim. Men who thought they were too smart to be conned. Men who believed their wealth made them invincible. Men who learned too late that arrogance is the easiest weakness to exploit. Sterling is just the latest model, I said. Garrison nodded. I kept reading. Chicago, 2019. Miami, 2021. Houston, 2022. Each case file showed the same pattern. Initial investment, growing returns, lavish event to celebrate success, then overnight collapse. Offshore accounts emptied. Woman vanished. Men left holding worthless paper and federal investigations. Some people destroy lives because they are evil. Sarah Higgins destroys lives because it is Tuesday and she has bills to pay. I do not know which is worse. Then I reached page 17. Chicago 2019 victim roster. David Lorne, investment banker. Lost $4.3 million in cryptocurrency scheme orchestrated by Sarah Higgins. Committed suicide March 2020. Left behind wife and 2 teenage daughters. My throat tightened. David Lorne, I said quietly. Chicago, committed suicide March 2020. Garrison's expression did not change, but his voice dropped lower. He lost everything, he said. Wife, savings, career. She didn't kill him with a weapon. She killed him with paperwork. I closed the folder. Set it on the table between us. My eyes were stinging, but I refused to let tears form. Does the FBI have the warrant? Federal arrest warrant signed by the district court last month, Garrison said. They just need verification of location and execution timing. Can you guarantee she remains at the venue? She won't move an inch, I said. She is waiting for my signature on the final invoice, the wire transfer confirmation. She needs that paper trail clean before she can execute the exit. But I need you to understand one thing. Garrison waited. There are 80 staff members at my mother's restaurant chain who will lose their livelihoods when this collapses, I said. Line cooks, dishwashers, servers. They are completely innocent. When Sterling's fund goes down and the cross guarantee triggers seizure of my mother's business, those 80 people lose their jobs. They did not gamble. They did not betray anyone. They just showed up to work and cooked food. Garrison studied me across the table. Is 6 weeks enough time for them to be absorbed elsewhere, he asked. I thought about the operational capacity of my 7 properties, the expansion plans Conrad and I had been reviewing, the kitchen staffing models. I will ensure it, I said. Garrison nodded slowly. The nod of a man who had known my father for 30 years and understood that his daughter would not sacrifice innocent people for personal revenge. You want to know the difference between revenge and responsibility. Revenge only cares about the target. Responsibility counts every person in the blast radius. Your father would be proud, Garrison said quietly. I did not trust myself to respond to that, so I picked up my coffee instead. Drank what was left. It had gone cold. November 15th, I said. The wedding reception starts at 8 p.m. Sarah will remain at the venue until wire confirmation comes through. That usually processes between 9 and 10 p.m. for transactions of that size. You will have a 2-hour window. And Sterling. Sterling will be wherever she is, I said. He does not know he is the useful idiot. He thinks he is the success story. Garrison retrieved the folder, slid it back into his messenger bag. The Bureau will coordinate directly with your security team, he said. Plain clothes. No uniforms until the arrest. Clean operation. Minimal disruption to other guests. 400 people will be at that event, I said. High-profile guests, financial press, society photographers. When you arrest her, it will be front-page news within an hour. Good, Garrison said. Let it be news. Let everyone see what happens when people like Sarah Higgins think they can run the same con in every city and never face consequences. He stood, put a $20 bill on the table for his coffee. I will be in touch 2 weeks before the event, he said. Final tactical briefing. Yumi Conrad and the FBI field agent running point. I nodded. He walked out of the coffee shop into the October morning. I sat there for another 5 minutes, watching through the glass as the city started its day. Delivery trucks rumbling down the street, subway grates steaming, people rushing toward trains and jobs and lives that had nothing to do with federal arrest warrants or 3-year revenge plans or 80 innocent restaurant workers who needed saving. The city was oblivious to the trap being finalized in a quiet booth, and I was finalizing something that had begun 3 years ago in a fluorescent corridor with a red pen and divorce papers. Something bigger than just getting even. Something that required me to count not just my targets but every person who would be affected when the trap finally closed. First, I needed Sterling to sign the contract that would end him. I sat in the dark adjoining room with the security monitor split into 4 angles. No audio, just real-time video. But I knew exactly what was being said because Conrad and I had rehearsed the script 3 times. October 2024. First week. Conrad's conference room in the financial district. The long glass table reflected overhead lights in sharp geometric patterns. 3 copies of pre-printed legal documents sat in neat stacks. Sterling Caldwell sat on one side. Conrad sat on the other. And I sat 1 room away in complete darkness, watching 4 camera angles simultaneously on a monitor that showed me everything I needed to see. Conrad placed the contract down. I watched his lips move through camera angle 1. The Vance Group is subsidizing $1.61 million, 70% of total wedding production costs. In exchange, the entirety of Apex Capital's general partner shares will be held in escrow as collateral. Sterling leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with calculated greed. I recognized that expression instantly. It was the exact same clinical, arrogant look he wore 3 years ago whenever he evaluated a vulnerable asset to exploit. Through camera angle 2, I watched Conrad deliver the killing blow with absolute calm. Clause 7.3, Conrad said, sliding the document closer to him. In the event of any criminal disruption or unlawful occurrence at the venue, forfeiture activates automatically and immediately, no notification period, no cure window. I leaned closer to my monitor, a cold smile touching my lips. I knew exactly what that clause meant. Because a criminal act constitutes an irremediable breach. There would be no legal exit for him once the trap closed. Sterling picked up the contract, flipped to page 17, where clause 7.3 was printed in bold text, read it, set it down, looked at Conrad. I leaned closer to the monitor. Then the conference room door opened and attorney Gerald Fletcher walked in. Sterling's corporate counsel, mid-50s, sharp suit. The kind of lawyer who made 7 figures preventing his clients from making catastrophic mistakes. He sat down beside Sterling, picked up the contract, read through it with the methodical precision of someone who understood that every word in a legal document was a potential weapon. He reached clause 7.3, stopped, read it again, tapped his pen against the contract 3 times, leaned toward Sterling. Camera angle 2 caught his lips perfectly. I read them the way you read a telegram that confirms everything you hoped for. This clause carries extreme risk, Sterling. Any criminal event, even something outside your control, triggers total forfeiture. Sterling waved his hand dismissively. The gesture was so familiar it made my chest tighten. The same gesture he had used 3 years ago when I raised concerns about operational budgets. The same gesture that said, I am smarter than you, and your caution is an insult to my intelligence. It's my wedding, Sterling said, and I read every word from his lips. What scandal could possibly happen? This is a corporate partnership with the most reputable hospitality group in New York. Fletcher tapped the contract again, harder this time. But Sterling was already reaching for the wedding budget spreadsheet, pointing at numbers, explaining to his lawyer that 1.61 million in subsidized costs meant they could upgrade the champagne, expand the guest list higher, live orchestra instead of DJ. Have you ever watched someone sign their own execution order while smiling? It is not satisfying. It is just sad. But I kept watching anyway. Fletcher tried one more time. I could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he leaned forward, the way his pen hovered over the warning clause. But Sterling was not listening. Sterling never listened when he thought he knew better. That was why I had married him, because he was confident and decisive and commanded every room he entered. That was why I was divorcing him from his future, because confidence without wisdom is just arrogance with better lighting. Sterling pulled out his phone, typed quickly. I watched his thumbs move across the screen through camera angle 3. Then Conrad's phone vibrated on the table. The prearrangement with Fletcher's firm. Any override email sent by Sterling would be forwarded to Conrad simultaneously. Conrad glanced at his screen, angled his laptop toward camera 4 just slightly enough for me to read the email displayed there. From Sterling Caldwell. Sent October 15th, 2024, 2:47 p.m. to Gerald Fletcher. CC Conrad Whitfield. Subject line venue contract authorization. Body. I acknowledge the risk parameters of Clause 7.3. Proceed with execution. Explicit digital evidence that Sterling knowingly bypassed legal warnings. When he attempted to sue later, and he would attempt to sue, this document would shut down every defense before his attorney finished the opening argument. Fletcher read the email on his own phone. His expression told me everything. He had done his job. He had warned his client. His client had overridden him in writing. He was no longer liable for what came next. Sterling picked up the fountain pen. The expensive one. The one he had bought to sign the divorce papers 3 years ago. He signed the first copy, then the second, then the third. His signature was bold. Confidence. The signature of a man who believed he controlled every variable in the equation. Conrad witnessed. Fletcher notarized with visible reluctance. The contract was executed. Confidence is not armor. It is a blindfold you tie on yourself and call courage. I shut off the monitor feed, stood, stepped out of the dark room into Conrad's office. I walked to the window that overlooked Manhattan from the 41st floor. The city spread out below me in a grid of glass and steel and ambition. Millions of people moved through their lives. None of them were aware that 41 floors above them, a man had just signed away his future because he could not imagine losing. Sterling had signed his name without reading the fine print, because he never countenanced the possibility of losing. That is the fatal flaw of men like him. Their confidence is a form of blindness. And I had just watched him walk into the trap, eyes wide open. My phone buzzed. Text from Conrad. Mother and brother scheduled for Thursday. Same conference room, same contract structure, different collateral. 3 days. In 3 days, my mother and brother would do exactly the same thing. 3 days after Sterling signed his death warrant, I returned to the dark monitoring room to watch my mother and brother do exactly the same thing, except this time, one of them would know what they were signing. October 2024. Same law office, same conference room, same 4-angle security monitor glowing in the darkness, while I sat and watched. My mother arrived first. Vivian Ashford in a cream blazer that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She walked into Conrad's conference room like she was arriving at a society luncheon, confident, entitled, certain that whatever documents waited for her signature would elevate her social standing. My brother followed 30 seconds later, Beckett in a dark suit that looked like it had been worn too many times without being cleaned. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes were on the floor. They sat down across from Conrad. And I watched from the darkness as my family sold themselves into the same trap that had already claimed Sterling. Conrad placed the documents on the table. Camera angle 1 gave me a perfect view of his face as he delivered the terms. This supplementary cross-guarantee legally ties your restaurant chain's corporate shares as additional collateral backing Mr. Caldwell's escrow agreement. Should Clause 7.3 activate both portfolios forfeit simultaneously? My mother barely glanced at the documents. Yes, yes, she said, and I read her lips through the monitor. Where do I sign? Sterling assured me this partnership will stabilize our cash flow by Q1. She was signing away 30 years of restaurant legacy without reading a single clause. Desperation makes people careless. But Beckett was reading. I watched him pick up the document. Flip to page 3. Stop. Read the criminal forfeiture clause twice. Then flip to page 5. Read the irrevocable nature of the cross guarantee. His hand paused on the page. Camera angle 2 showed me his face. He understood. Every word, every implication, every consequence. He looked at our mother, murmured something, pointed at page 3. My mother slapped his hand away. Her lips moved with sharp precision. Don't embarrass me in front of Mr. Whitfield. Your sister already humiliated this family enough. Sign the document. Beckett sat there for exactly 30 seconds. I watched the timestamp on the monitor. 14:23:17 to 14:23:47. 30 seconds where he could have walked away. 30 seconds where he could have said no. 30 seconds where courage could have overridden family loyalty and fear of confrontation. You want to know the cruelest thing about watching someone fail a moral test in real time? It is not that you cannot warn them. It is that they already know the right answer and are choosing the wrong one anyway. At 14:23:47, Beckett picked up the pen. His hand shook slightly, but the signature was legally binding. He knew exactly what he just signed, but knowing and acting are different currencies. He chose silence. Again. My mother signed with a flourish, smiled, asked Conrad when the partnership capital would be available for transfer. Conrad gave her the same answer he had given Sterling upon successful completion of the November 15th event. They shook hands. My mother left first, still smiling, still confident, still completely unaware that she had just signed away 3 decades of work because a man who once called her daughter a stain had promised her financial salvation. Beckett stayed behind for a moment, thanked Conrad quietly, then excused himself to the corridor. I switched to monitor angle 5, the camera that covered the elevator bank. Beckett stood there pacing, back and forth. 6 steps one direction, 6 steps back, the pattern of a man who wanted to run, but had nowhere to go. Then he pulled out his phone, dialed a number I recognized immediately. My old cell phone from 3 years ago. The number I had deactivated the night I walked out of the Legacy Hotel. What Beckett did not know was that Conrad had routed that old number to forward automatically to my current executive desk line. Technical redundancy in case anyone from my old life tried to reach me. My desk phone lit up. Voicemail recording activated. I listened to my brother's voice come through the speaker, raw, shaking. "Chloe," he said, "if you're out there listening to this somehow, just let me know you're safe." He thought he was leaving a message in the void, seeking absolution from a sister he believed had disappeared. "I don't know where you went," he continued, "but I hope you're doing better than us. I hope you're somewhere far away from all of this." The line went dead. My brother had just signed away 30 years of my parents' restaurant legacy. And he knew it, and he did it anyway. That is not evil. It is worse. It is cowardice wearing a family name. I sat in the darkness and listened to the voicemail play again. He knew everything, from the very beginning. And he chose silence. Now he wanted forgiveness for cowardice. I slowly closed the monitor feed and stared at the dark screen. The truth was now written in stone. My mother and brother had executed the supplementary cross guarantee. Beckett demonstrated full comprehension of Clause 7.3's implications, yet he proceeded with his signature anyway. Even his desperate voicemail on my deactivated number was nothing more than an afterthought of guilt. He knew everything from the very beginning, and his cowardice changed nothing about the storm that was coming. But it did dictate exactly how I would handle him after the dust settled far better than he ever deserved. I closed the log. A coward is far more dangerous than an evil man. Because evil you can predict. Evil follows patterns. Evil has motivations you can map. Cowardice just collapses when you need it most. And I still had to protect 80 innocent people from the collapse I was engineering. 80 restaurant workers who had shown up every day, cooked food, served customers, earned honest paychecks. None of them had gambled. None of them had betrayed anyone. None of them had chosen cowardice over courage. They were just going to lose their jobs when my trap closed on November 15th, unless I moved faster than the collapse. Conrad walked into my office at 5:47 on a November morning with the Wall Street Journal folded under his arm, and before I could say good morning, he placed it flat on my desk with the headline facing up. Early November 2024. Pre-dawn darkness still pressed against the 41st floor windows of Vance headquarters. Manhattan's skyline was just beginning to lighten that gray period between night and morning when the city belonged to delivery trucks and insomniacs and people like me who had stopped sleeping normally 3 years ago. I looked down at the newspaper, Wall Street Journal, business section. The headline read, "Who is the elusive Chairman Vance, the hospitality powerhouse recording 400% growth with an unknown figurehead?" I picked up the paper, read the first paragraph, then the second. Then I stopped at the third paragraph and read it 3 times while my coffee went cold in my hand. Sterling had provided an exclusive quote to the financial press. I read it aloud. "Chairman Vance is a core strategic partner of mine. This wedding is heavily backed by our closest corporate ally. I am not at liberty to disclose further proprietary details." Conrad stood on the other side of my desk with his arms crossed, watching me process it. "He's trading on your name to inflate his market valuation," he said quietly, "before he even knows whose face it belongs to." I set the paper down, looked up at Conrad, then I laughed. Not a happy laugh. Not even a bitter laugh. Just the dry, exhausted sound of someone who has watched the same man make the same mistake so many times, it has stopped being surprising and started being pathetic. "He is selling my identity for the final piece of leverage he will ever have," I said, "and he is completely oblivious." Conrad pulled out his phone, opened an email, turned the screen toward me. "He is also aggressively pitching investors at the wedding reception," he said, "using the Vance endorsement as institutional validation. 12 high-net-worth targets on the guest list. He has been cultivating them for 6 months. They all believe Chairman Vance has vetted and endorsed his fund." I looked at the list of names, recognized half of them. Hedge fund managers, private equity principals, family office directors. The kind of people who moved 8-figure sums based on reputation and relationships. "They believe Chairman Vance has vetted his fund," I said. "He's using my reputation as collateral for fraud." "Yes," Conrad said. "He is weaponizing your anonymous reputation to extract a final round of capital before the wedding night." "What do you call a man who steals your name to sell lies to strangers at his wedding to another woman?" "I call him predictable." I handed the phone back to Conrad. "What did you prepare?" "By midnight November 15th, Conrad said, "every one of those targets will receive an encrypted legal notice from your office. Not an investment invitation, a criminal liability warning. Formal notification regarding the fund's structural insolvency, and an urgent directive to retain criminal defense counsel if any funds were wired." I looked at him. "You are protecting them," I said. "I am protecting innocent people from being defrauded by a con artist," Conrad corrected. "Sterling is not the only predator at that wedding. Sarah Higgins has been running this scheme for 5 years across 3 states. Every investor Sterling brings to that reception is a potential victim. The legal notices go out at midnight after the arrests before the wire transfers clear." I picked up the newspaper again, read Sterling's quote one more time, folded the paper back down, set it beside my cold coffee. Then I looked at Conrad with the expression he had seen before, the one I wore when closing an acquisition nobody else saw coming. "Let him run," I said. "Let him pitch. Let him invoke Chairman Vance's name to every investor who will listen." "And in 10 days, Conrad asked. "In 10 days he will utter my name for the absolute last time," I said. "In front of 200 live lenses, every financial journalist in New York, cameras recording every syllable. And you will be standing right there to hear it," Conrad said. "Yes." I set the paper down and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Conrad came to stand beside me. "10 days," he said. "10 days," I agreed. Sterling had traded on my name for the last time. He had weaponized my reputation. He had told the Wall Street Journal that Chairman Vance was his closest corporate ally. And in 10 days, Chairman Vance was going to stand in front of him and watch him realize that his closest corporate ally was the woman he had thrown away in a fluorescent corridor 3 years ago. I folded the paper and looked out at Manhattan awakening. Delivery trucks rumbling through streets, subway grates steaming in the morning cold, office lights flickering on floor by floor across the grid. The city appeared perfectly tranquil under the November dawn. But nothing was tranquil. The city was merely holding its breath. And in 10 days everything would detonate. But first, I had one last piece to put in place the 80 people who didn't deserve to pay for my family's sins. Garrison arrived at my penthouse at dawn with a metal briefcase and 4 photographs' faces. I would never forget the invisible army who would stand behind me when the empire fell. November 5th, 2024. 6 in the morning, 10 days until detonation. The 80 innocent people I needed to protect were about to receive their salvation. But first, I had to coordinate the final tactical elements that would bring down everyone who deserved it. Garrison set the briefcase on my marble counter. The click echoed through the penthouse. He spread 4 photographs across the granite surface headshots of men and women I had never met, but would recognize anywhere after today. 4 agents, he said, his calloused finger tapping each face. Corporate attire, distributed across the ballroom. You will never see them move. NYPD perimeter locks down at 7:45. Your signal step away from the podium after your toast. Sterling does not leave that room. Dawn light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan stretched below us, still asleep. Coffee steam rose between the tactical documents Garrison had laid out beside the photographs. What if he tries to run? I asked. Garrison's voice dropped to gravel. He won't get 10 feet. Asset forfeiture triggers automatically 30 minutes after arrest. Every account, every property, every offshore shell frozen before his lawyer answers the phone. I memorized the 4 faces, 2 men, 2 women, all of them trained to disappear into crowds of financial elites, all of them carrying federal arrest warrants. The moment you step from that podium, Garrison said quietly, 28 years of waiting ends. 28 years. The number my father died. The number of years he had spent as a police officer before he retired. The number that connected Garrison's loyalty to me through decades of friendship with a man who was no longer here to see justice delivered. My father's ghost felt closer than ever. At 10:30, I sat in Conrad's office 30 floors above Midtown traffic while he slid an invoice across his mahogany desk. Sterling's signature sat at the bottom, bold, arrogant loops. The number stamped in red, $47,000. This came through corporate accounts last week, Conrad said. Sterling personally approved a $47,000 audiovisual system upgrade for the Grand Ballroom. Called it an anniversary gift. That is the system through which we will broadcast his confession. I picked up the invoice. The paper felt heavier than it should have. He paid for his own execution, I said. Conrad leaned back in his leather chair. It creaked. His laugh was dry, humorless. Poetic justice has a price tag, he said. $47,000 to be exact. I stared at Sterling's signature. He had paid for the speakers that would broadcast his confession. He had paid for the microphones that would amplify his crimes. He had paid for the display screens that would show his mistress's mugshots to 300 witnesses. $47,000, the exact price of poetic justice. He bought the rope, Conrad said, and I was going to watch him hang himself with it. Before I reveal what happened when Vernon Hayes arrived, representing 80 families who didn't know salvation was coming, answer this. Is protecting innocent people revenge or justice? Comment, A for revenge, B for justice, and add your reason in one sentence. Quick note. The next part includes fictionalized details to deepen the emotional impact. The lesson is what matters. At 3 o'clock, my penthouse doorbell chimed. Vernon Hayes stood in the threshold. 58 years old, silver temples, hands scarred from decades of kitchen work. He wore his only suit threadbare at the elbows, clean but worn. He looked like a man expecting another corporate vulture. I invited him inside. I was told Chairman Vance wanted to meet, he said carefully. I expected another corporate raider. I poured him bourbon. Neat handed him the glass. I am Chairman Vance, I said. 3 years ago, the man who destroyed your restaurants called me a high-end maid. Now I am offering you executive chef at my flagship property and employment for all 80 of your staff. His eyes widened. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the glass. All 80, he asked. Miss Ashford, Chairman, that is over $2 million in annual payroll. I know exactly what it costs, I said. I also know what loyalty is worth. Come to the gala on November 15th. Watch the man who tried to erase you get erased himself. Vernon set the glass down. His jaw tightened when I said high-end maid. His eyes glistened when I offered salvation for 80 families. Why, he asked. Because Sterling tried to erase you like a line item on a spreadsheet, I said. But you are not a number, And neither were the other 79. Vernon's hands shook as he lifted the bourbon glass again. 58 years old, 4 decades in kitchens, scarred knuckles from thousands of meals prepared with dignity. Sterling had tried to erase him, to erase all of them. 80 people who had shown up every day and done honest work while my family gambled their futures away. I watched tears pool in Vernon's eyes and realized this is what revenge was always supposed to be. Not destruction, salvation. I accept, Vernon said quietly, and I will be at that gala. Not just for me, for all 80 of us. I shook his hand. And I understood that in 10 days, when Sterling Caldwell stood in that ballroom surrounded by financial elite and press cameras, Vernon Hayes would be watching from the crowd. The man Sterling had tried to destroy would witness his destruction. That was not cruelty. That was symmetry. 10 days until the gala, and every piece was positioned. 4 invisible FBI agents whose faces I had memorized. One audio system Sterling had paid $47,000 to upgrade. 80 rescued employees represented by a chef with scarred hands and weathered dignity. And Sterling Caldwell walked toward that ballroom with no idea the walls were already closing in. 6 security monitors glow in the darkened command center. Left screen shows Sterling adjusting his tuxedo, right screen shows my mother smoothing her dress, and none of them know I am watching. 10 days vanished like smoke. Now it is November 15th, 2024, 10 o'clock in the morning, and I sit in the Master Security Command Center at Vance Hotel Group headquarters. The room is dark except for cold blue light from 6 screens. Each monitor shows a different player in tonight's drama, all preparing for a gala they think they understand. Top left. Sterling stands in the lobby of his residential building, adjusting his bow tie before the entrance mirrors. His tuxedo is custom $10,000 cufflinks catching light. He looks confident, triumphant. He has no idea the building's common area security network has been managed under a Vance Facilities contract for the past 8 months. Every lobby camera, every corridor feed, every elevator panel, running quietly through my servers. Top center. Solene Mercer. Sarah Higgins to the FBI sits on a hotel bed 3 blocks away scrolling through an encrypted phone. Her black dress hangs on the closet door. She checks her makeup with methodical focus of someone who has lived under false identities for years. She does not know Agent Eliza Ramsey has been tracking her digital signature for 6 weeks. Top right. My mother, Vivienne Ashford, stands in her dressing room smoothing her champagne-colored gown. She looks regal every inch the society matriarch. Beckett appears behind her adjusting his tuxedo. They think tonight celebrates my success. They think Chairman Vance is someone else. In 7 hours, I will strip away every lie. Bottom row, 3 more feeds. The gala ballroom where 80 employees run final checks. The FBI command van disguised as a catering truck. My penthouse suite where a black gown hangs waiting. I lean back watching all 6 screens. Every piece is positioned. Every player is moving exactly where I need them. My phone vibrates audio feed from the Grand Ballroom AV system, the $47,000 upgrade Sterling personally financed. He is making a call from the venue's private lounge. I tap the screen and his voice fills the command center crisp and clear. Richard Sterling Caldwell, just confirming our arrangement for tonight. A pause. I know exactly who Richard is. Richard Pembroke, a venture capitalist. Sterling has been courting for months, promising access to Chairman Vance in exchange for future investment. That's right, Sterling says, voice smooth. Exclusive introduction. FaceTime with the chairman guaranteed. This is the opportunity I told you about. Vance doesn't take meetings with just anyone, but I have the relationship. Trust me, Richard, after tonight you'll have the connection you need. Another pause. $2 million minimum to start, but honestly, once you see the portfolio, you'll want to go bigger. The chairman's expansion plans are aggressive: 20 new properties in 18 months. Getting in on the ground floor, that's the play. He laughs that easy corporate laugh I used to hear across the dinner table. See you tonight, and Richard, bring your checkbook. The call ends. I watch Sterling set his phone down, straighten his bow tie, smile at his reflection. How many times has he done this? How many people has he sold access to Chairman Vance, the mysterious magnate he believes he has some connection to? How many promises has he made, commodifying an identity he thinks belongs to someone else, never realizing he is selling me packaging, me turning me into a weapon he will use on himself. The irony is so sharp it could draw blood. I switched my gaze to the bottom right monitor showing my penthouse where my black tailored gown hung in the frame. It was severe, perfectly engineered, and completely devoid of any bridal celebration. This was the exact armor I wore when I forced the hostile acquisition of the Donovan resort chain and signed the final takeover papers for the Pacific Grandview. I shut off the command center feeds, took the private elevator up to my suite, and stepped into the gown. The black silk moved like water and fit like certainty. As I fastened the clasp and looked into the full-length mirror, Chairman Vance stared back at me. I was no longer the invisible manager who served drinks at the Legacy Hotel Gala. I was the woman who had turned betrayal into strategy, and tonight I was walking into a ballroom to sign the most important contract of my life without leaving a single drop of ink on paper. At exactly 8 p.m., both ballroom doors opened, and 400 people who thought they were attending separate events collided in the center corridor. Champagne glasses raised confusion, turning to curiosity, turning to anticipation. I stood behind a velvet curtain 30 feet from the stage, watching through a narrow gap as the engineered chaos unfolded exactly as planned. West Wing doors swung open, first wedding reception guests, informal evening wear laughter, and champagne fizz spilling into the marble corridor. 2 seconds later, East Wing doors opened, corporate anniversary attendees in tailored suits and cocktail dresses, equally surprised to find themselves face to face with strangers who should not exist in their carefully segregated evening. The crowd swelled, 400 bodies filling a space designed for movement, not assembly. Voices rose in curious murmurs. Security personnel I had personally positioned guided the flow, subtle nudges directing everyone toward the center intersection, where a small stage waited beneath a single spotlight currently dark. Miles Kenton, 45 years old. Professional event. MC, I had hired specifically for this dual gala, stepped to the microphone with the smooth confidence of someone who had opened 1,000 corporate events and knew exactly how to command a confused room. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice amplified through the $47,000 audio system Sterling personally financed, we have a special executive request. For the next 15 minutes, both celebrations will merge, an unprecedented honor. The murmurs shifted. Confusion became excitement. This was not chaos, this was exclusivity, privilege, the kind of unexpected moment people would mention at dinner parties for months. I watched faces light up with the thrill of being chosen for something unusual. And then I found Sterling in the crowd. He stood 10 feet from the stage, Solene Mercer beside him in her black dress, both of them holding champagne flutes. His face was flushed eyes bright with recognition and triumph. He leaned toward a man beside him, someone I recognized from the invitation list, a venture capitalist Sterling had been courting, and I watched his lips move even though I could not hear the words through the curtain gap. Chairman Vance arranged this. Sterling was saying, I was certain of it. I told you, close personal associate. The introduction is happening now. The irony was so perfect it felt like a gift. He thought this convergence was proof. Proof of his connection, his influence, his value. He thought the merging of two events into one theatrical moment was Chairman Vance honoring their relationship, setting the stage for the introduction Sterling had promised to dozens of guests over the past 6 weeks. He had no idea the convergence was a trap. No idea that every door, every security guard, every timed opening had been choreographed not to honor him, but to cage him before maximum witnesses. 400 witnesses, exactly as planned. I shifted my gaze to my mother. Vivian Ashford stood near the center of the crowd in her champagne-colored gown, diamond collar, catching light spine straight, and chin lifted. She was scanning the room with the practiced eye of a society matriarch, calculating who was present, who mattered, who would remember this night. She thought she was about to witness my triumph as the mysterious partner who saved the family business. She thought tonight would elevate the Ashford name back to its former glory. Beside her, Beckett stood frozen, arms flat against his sides, champagne glass untouched in his left hand. His eyes were locked on the empty space where the velvet curtain hung, and even from 30 feet away, I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders held themselves too still. He knew. Not the details perhaps, but he knew something was catastrophically wrong. Miles Kenton continued speaking, his voice smooth and practiced, welcoming both groups, making small jokes that drew polite laughter, warming the crowd for what came next. I listened to his cadence, felt the rhythm of the room shifting from confusion to anticipation, and counted heartbeats. Do you know what it looks like when a man stands at the center of his own trap and mistakes it for a throne? Sterling raised his champagne glass. His smile was wide, confident, the expression of someone who believed he was seconds away from the most important introduction of his career. Around him, guests I recognized from the invitation list: Marcus, Vance, Richard, Pembroke. 3 other investors Sterling had promised, guaranteed access, positioned themselves closer, angling for proximity to whatever was about to happen. Soline stood beside him, face calm and controlled, but I caught the way her eyes moved across the room, cataloging exits, scanning for threats with the practiced awareness of someone who had lived under false identities for years. She did not know that 4 FBI agents were positioned among the 400 witnesses, or that Agent Eliza Ramsey was watching from the back corner, with her hand near her concealed weapon. Vivienne adjusted her diamond collar, turned to a woman beside her, a society matron whose name I had seen on 100 charity gala lists, and spoke words I could not hear but could easily imagine. Something about connections at the highest levels. Something about witnessing history. And Beckett, still frozen, still staring at the curtain, his face pale beneath the chandelier light. Miles Kenton paused. Let the silence build for exactly 3 seconds, professional timing, maximum impact, and then his voice dropped into the formal cadence reserved for introducing executives and dignitaries. It is my profound privilege, he said, to introduce the sponsoring chairman and founder of Vance Hotel Group. The spotlight ignited, white, blinding, a column of pure light hitting the floor directly in front of the velvet curtain where I stood hidden in shadow. 400 faces turned toward the light. Champagne glasses paused mid-sip. Conversation died into silence so complete I could hear the hum of the audio system, the distant kitchen noise 3 corridors away, the sound of my own heartbeat. Behind the curtain, I took one final breath. 3 years ago, Sterling Caldwell called me worthless, told me I contributed nothing, served me divorce papers that described me as a high-end maid with no future worth keeping. Tonight, 400 witnesses would watch me erase him. The curtain parted. I stepped through in my black tailored gown, not celebration dress, not party attire, but the armor I wore for hostile acquisitions. The fabric moved like water, fit like certainty. My heels clicked against marble, the sound sharp and clear in the absolute silence. Sterling's champagne glass froze mid-air. His mouth opened. Recognition dawned across his face in slow motion. First confusion, then disbelief, then the terrible moment when his brain stopped refusing what his eyes already knew. That silhouette, that walk, that face. Impossible. But I was not impossible, it was inevitable. Doors parted. A blinding white spotlight hit the floor. I walked directly into the light. I reached the microphone and opened my mouth to speak. And that was the moment Sterling's champagne glass hit the marble floor and shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. Crystal exploding against stone, champagne spraying across polished marble shards, scattering in a 3-foot radius around his feet. 400 faces turned from me to Sterling to me again, confusion crystallizing into shock as they tried to process what their eyes were showing them. Sterling stood paralyzed. His right hand was still raised in the position that had been holding the glass, fingers curved around empty air. His face had drained completely, white, bloodless beneath the chandelier light. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. His brain was rejecting what his eyes already knew. Chairman Vance was supposed to be a stranger, a mysterious hotel magnate, the connection he had been selling for 6 weeks, the introduction he had promised to Richard Pembroke and Marcus Vance, and a dozen other investors who stood scattered through the crowd right now, watching this unfold. Chairman Vance was not supposed to be his ex-wife. I watched the recognition move across his face in stages. First confusion, why is she here? Second disbelief, that cannot be her standing on that stage. Third, the terrible moment when his brain stopped fighting and accepted the impossible truth. His knees buckled slightly. He caught himself, locked his legs, but the damage was visible. Everyone in the front 3 rows could see a man whose entire reality had just collapsed. The glass hits marble and shatters, perfect sound, the sound of a man realizing he walked into his own execution. I let the silence stretch. Let it press down on the room like physical weight. Let 400 witnesses stand in that moment of suspended comprehension, trying to understand what they were seeing. Then I shifted my gaze to the others. Solene Mercer stood 2 feet to Sterling's left, her black dress elegant and understated, designed to blend into crowds. But her eyes were not blending. They were sharp, calculating, flicking between me and Sterling, and the exits, with the rapid assessment of someone whose survival had always depended on reading rooms faster than anyone else. Her hand moved toward her phone, not wedding guest anxiety, not social discomfort. Escape calculation. She knew exactly what this moment meant, exposure trapped, the walls closing in. Behind her, my mother stood frozen in her champagne-colored gown, one hand locked on her purse with white-knuckled grip. Her mouth twitched at the corners, trying to form words that would not come. I watched her social crown disintegrate in real time. Every carefully constructed narrative she had built, her daughter, the mysterious business partner, the Ashford family reclaiming prominence tonight's gala as their triumphant return to society, all of it crumbling as she stared at me standing in the spotlight, wearing the black dress of hostile acquisitions. "This cannot be happening," she whispered, barely audible even in the silence. She was nothing. But I was not nothing. I had never been nothing. Beckett stood beside her, and unlike everyone else in the room, he was not staring at me in shock. His eyes were closed. Not squeezed shut in denial, just closed with the quiet resignation of someone who had seen this coming and knew there was no escape. He had always been the smart one. He had looked at Chairman Vance's acquisition pattern, at the timeline, at the properties, and he had known. Maybe not the details, but the shape of it. He knew his sister never forgot anything, and he knew what revenge looked like when it was patient enough to wait 3 years. You need to understand what it means to watch 3 people process the same information in 3 different ways. Solene calculates escape routes, mother calculates social damage, brother calculates inevitability, and Sterling has stopped calculating entirely. He is still standing in the same position, hand raised, mouth open, body locked in, the moment the glass fell. He looks like a man who has been struck by lightning and has not yet realized he is supposed to fall down. I took 3 steps forward until I stood directly at the microphone, the spotlight so bright it turned everything beyond the first few rows into shadow. My hands rested on the podium, steady and calm. The black silk of my gown caught the light, severe and unforgiving. "Good evening," I said, and my voice carried across the ballroom through speakers Sterling personally selected, installed, and paid for. "I am Chairman Vance, founder of Vance Hotel Group. Some people in this room know me by a different title." I paused, let the words settle. Former titles, I should say. Sterling made a sound. Not quite a word. Not quite a breath. Something between a gasp and a moan, the noise of a man whose lungs have forgotten how to work. 400 faces stared at me, and I could see the mental calculations happening in real time. Guests who had attended our wedding reception 6 years ago were doing the math, remembering the bride who served drinks at the Legacy Hotel, the young manager Sterling married, and then discarded. Corporate anniversary guests who knew nothing about my history were simply confused, trying to understand why the chairman's introduction had triggered a champagne glass shattering and a man visibly collapsing in the front row. "Let me begin with this single most critical matter tonight," I said, my voice clear and controlled, each word precisely enunciated. "And I assure you it has nothing to do with me." The ballroom held its breath. $47,000. That is what Sterling paid to upgrade the audio system. That is what he paid to broadcast his own destruction across 7 floors. That is the exact price of irony. The microphone caught every syllable, crystal clear, professional grade acoustics that would carry my voice not just through this ballroom, but through every corridor, every elevator, every public space in the building. Sterling had insisted on the upgrade 6 months ago, told me the old system was inadequate for a property of this caliber, and demanded the best. He got exactly what he asked for. "There is someone in this room tonight," I continued, my eyes moving across the crowd, but never quite landing on Sterling, who has committed crimes that extend far beyond personal betrayal, fraud, conspiracy, the deliberate destruction of a business that employed 63 people. Sterling's face went from white to gray, and every word of his confession, I said, my voice dropping into a tone so cold it could freeze steel, was recorded. The microphone caught every syllable. House audio across all 7 floors system he paid to upgrade. I began speaking words I hadn't told anyone for 3 years. I spoke 3 sentences into the microphone before I saw my mother's face change from horror to calculation, and I knew exactly what was coming next. But first, the speech. 3 years ago, I said, my voice carrying across the ballroom through the upgraded audio system, crystal clear and perfectly amplified. I managed a hotel property and was the wife of a man in this room. I was informed I was nothing but a glorified maid, lacking status, that I did not belong at certain tables, that my presence diminished the people around me. 400 faces stared. Sterling stood frozen champagne-soaked shoes surrounded by glass shards. Beckett had opened his eyes and was watching me with the quiet resignation of someone who knew this moment had been inevitable from the day I signed the divorce papers. "So I stopped trying to sit at their table," I continued. "I bought the table instead." A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the crowd, not mocking laughter, recognition. Several guests nodded, smiling with the kind of appreciation reserved for a well-executed business maneuver. "My grandmother, Helen Vance, was a schoolteacher for 40 years, I said. "She taught mathematics to children whose parents could barely afford textbooks. She never received a monument. No building bears her name. No foundation carries her legacy." I reached into the small pocket concealed in my gown and withdrew a red pen. Behind me on the podium sat the Master Anniversary Chronicle, the official document that would be photographed, published, archived as the permanent record of tonight's gala. "This hotel group is hers," I said, uncapping the pen. "Every property, every acquisition, every employee who found dignity in work when other companies would not hire them, this is her monument." I signed the Chronicle in bold red ink, Helen Vance Memorial Hotel Group, and beneath it my full signature as chairman. The applause started small, a few guests in the back, and then built like a wave, rolling forward until 400 people were clapping, some standing, the sound deafening in the marble and crystal acoustics of the ballroom. And that was when my mother moved. I saw it happen in stages. Her face shifted from frozen horror to something else, calculation, opportunity. The rapid assessment of someone who had spent 58 years navigating social hierarchies and knew exactly how to position herself in any situation. Her hand released her purse, her shoulders straightened. Her expression transformed into radiant pride. She started walking toward the stage. "Liora," she called out, arms extending, voice pitched to carry across the ballroom. "My beautiful girl, I knew you were capable of extraordinary things." 400 guests fell silent. The applause died. Every face turned from me to her, to me again, watching this new drama unfold. Vivian Ashford reached the stage steps, climbed them with practiced grace, and moved toward me with open arms, as if she intended to embrace me in front of 400 witnesses and a dozen press cameras positioned around the ballroom perimeter. I did not step back. I held my ground at the microphone, one hand still resting on the signed Chronicle, and waited until she was 3 feet away. Then I spoke. "Mother," I said, my voice cool and precise, amplified through every speaker in the building. "3 years ago, when I was drenched in wine at your dinner table, you called me a stain on the family name. You told me I had embarrassed you beyond repair. You suggested I disappear entirely, rather than continue to damage the Ashford reputation." Her arms froze mid-reach. Her smile held, but I watched the calculation behind her eyes shift to panic. "Today, I own the largest hospitality portfolio in this city," I continued. 15 properties, 800 employees, revenue that exceeds every Ashford family holding combined. And now that the cameras are here, Now that the press is watching, now that I have value, you claim me as your pride. You want to know what it looks like when a woman who called you worthless tries to claim you as hers in front of 400 witnesses. She runs toward you with open arms. She uses endearments that were absent for 3 years. She smiles for the cameras, and you held the microphone like a weapon. I want the press to document this face, I said, turning slightly toward the cameras. Not to condemn her, but to remember that love should never require a financial balance sheet. That family should not be transactional. That claiming someone only when they succeed is not pride, it is opportunism. My mother's face went white. She took one step backward, then another, her champagne-colored gown suddenly looking less regal and more costume. The crowd murmured a low, uncomfortable sound of people witnessing something too intimate for public consumption. And then I saw movement at the ballroom perimeter. 4 figures cutting through the crowd with purposeful stride, not rushing but moving with unmistakable authority. Dark suits, federal bearing, professional formation. Agent Eliza Ramsey, 38 years old, FBI special agent assigned to White-Collar Crime Division, led the group with the kind of controlled intensity that comes from years of hunting fugitives across state lines. Solene Mercer saw them first. Her face, which had maintained perfect composure through my entire revelation through the champagne glass shattering through Sterling's paralysis, finally cracked. Her eyes went wide. Her hand moved toward her phone, and then she bolted. She made it 6 steps before Agent Ramsey blocked the exit. Sarah Higgins. Agent Ramsey said, her voice cutting through the ballroom with the flat authority of federal law enforcement. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and cross-state money laundering. She held up 3 photographs, each one showing the same face with different hair, different makeup, different names. Houston 2022, Miami 2021, Chicago 2019. The evidence was undeniable. 3 mugshots, 3 aliases, across 3 different states over the last 3 years. Sterling Caldwell had married a wanted federal fugitive 4 hours ago, and by doing so, his newly signed escrow agreement just turned into a financial guillotine. Clause 7.3 had officially detonated, transforming his lavish wedding into a federal crime scene within seconds. The trap he executed without reading had just woken up to consume him. Conrad Whitfield walked through 400 frozen witnesses and placed a formal forfeiture execution notice directly against Sterling Caldwell's chest 3 minutes after his bride was handcuffed, 30 seconds after his life ended. The ballroom was still processing Solene's arrest. Agent Ramsey had escorted her toward the exit, steel handcuffs glinting under chandelier light. 3 mugshots displayed on her tablet for anyone close enough to see. The crowd had parted like water, creating a corridor of witnesses who would spend the next year telling this story at dinner parties and board meetings. But Conrad did not watch the FBI escort their prisoner. He walked directly to Sterling, who stood in the same position he had occupied since my revelation, champagne-soaked shoes surrounded by glass shards, face the color of old paper. Conrad held a sealed legal portfolio in his left hand. With his right, he withdrew a single document and pressed it flat against Sterling's chest. Pursuant to Clause 7.3, Conrad said, his voice carrying the flat professional tone of someone who had delivered bad news to powerful men for 30 years. A federal criminal event has occurred on these premises. Forfeiture is fully active. The entirety of your Apex Capital General Partner equity has been transferred to Vance Hotel Group. The Delaware Corporate Registry and UCC1 filings were updated 30 seconds ago. Sterling's face drained from sickly green to corpse white. His hand came up automatically, taking the paper from Conrad's grasp, but his eyes did not focus on the words. He was still staring at Conrad's face, trying to process information his brain refused to accept. This is illegal, Sterling said, his voice cracking on the second word. She cannot. You signed this agreement on October 15th at 2:47 p.m., Conrad interrupted. Your digital signature is on file with 3 independent witnesses. The clause was explicitly written. Would you like to see it? Sterling crushed the paper against his chest. I want to see my lawyer. I was your attorney of record for 8 years, Conrad said. I resigned from your representation 11 months ago, a conflict of interest you were formally notified of in writing. You retained Gerald Fletcher as replacement counsel. Mr. Fletcher is standing behind you. I drafted the escrow agreement. I sent you 3 separate emails highlighting Clause 7.3 and its implications. You replied to the third email with explicit acknowledgement. 400 witnesses leaned forward. The ballroom had transformed from wedding venue to courtroom, and everyone present understood they were watching a verdict delivered in real time. Conrad reached into his portfolio and withdrew a second document. Printed email. Single page. He held it up so Sterling could see the header October 15th, 2024, 2:47 p.m. From Sterling Caldwell to Conrad Whitfield. Your email, Conrad said. Your signature. Quote, I acknowledge risk parameters of Clause 7.3. Proceed with execution. End quote. Sterling took the paper with a shaking hand. I watched from the stage as his eyes moved across the printed text, reading words he had written 6 weeks ago, when he believed he was protecting himself, when he thought the clause was insurance against my interference, when Celine had convinced him that $10 million justified any legal risk. I thought... Sterling's voice came out hollow, drained of the confidence that had carried him through board meetings and investor pitches for a decade. The clause was insurance. She said it was standard. Conrad said, is currently in federal custody facing charges in 3 states. And the clause was standard. Standard forfeiture language. Criminal event triggers immediate transfer. You signed it. Have you ever watched a man read his own signature and realize he signed his execution warrant? Sterling's hand shakes. The paper trembles. October 15th, 2:47 p.m. I acknowledge risk parameters. He never read past the first line. He trusted the woman who showed him phantom account statements and called it love. He trusted that his lawyer would protect him even while drafting language that would destroy him. He trusted that Chairman Vance, the mysterious hotel magnate he had been selling access to for 6 weeks, would never discover his schemes. He trusted everything except the possibility that the woman he divorced could become someone who mattered. I stood on the stage in my black acquisition dress and watched him process the mathematics of his own destruction. His fund transferred, his equity gone, his career ended, his bride arrested, and 400 witnesses documenting every second of his collapse. There is one more detail, Conrad said, and I heard the slight shift in his tone that meant he was delivering the final blow. Your bride's $10 million investment portfolio does not exist. Phantom cryptocurrency ledger. Forensic audit completed this afternoon revealed the accounts she showed you were fabricated screenshots. Apex Capital is currently running a net negative balance due to the wedding costs you personally fronted from your line of credit. The paper fell from Sterling's hand. It drifted down like a leaf, landed on the marble floor beside the champagne glass shards, settled flat with his signature facing upward for anyone nearby to read. 10 million, Sterling whispered. She showed me the accounts, the blockchain confirmations, the... Fabricated, Conrad said, all of it. $10 million. Phantom. Gone. Never existed. Sterling financed the wedding, the venue, the dress, the audio system that broadcast his destruction across 7 floors from personal credit, to marry a fugitive con artist, who is now in handcuffs. His legs stop working. Sterling Caldwell dropped straight down onto the marble floor. Not a stumble, not a gradual collapse. His knees simply stopped supporting his weight, and he fell, landing hard enough that I heard the impact from the stage. His pristine black wedding suit crumpled around him. His hand reached out, automatically grabbed the printed email, held it against his chest like a child holding a blanket. 400 witnesses stood in absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. They simply watched a man who had spent 15 years building a reputation as a ruthless dealmaker sit on a ballroom floor holding the signature that destroyed him. I watched him collapse in pristine black suit. I remembered night he placed red pen in my face and told me I was too stupid to understand contracts, too worthless to deserve explanations, too insignificant to matter. He made me sign divorce papers without reading them, told me I should be grateful he was letting me leave with anything at all. Now his turn to stare at legal paperwork with paralyzed helplessness. Now his turn to realize that the person holding the pen controls everything. Now his turn to understand what it means to be erased. And I realized there was one more person in this ballroom who needed to understand exactly what her choices had cost. Conrad Whitfield handed my mother a second envelope, and I watched 30 years of her life drain from her face in the 3 seconds it took her to read the first line. Sterling still lay on the marble floor behind us, holding his own signature, 400 witnesses frozen in uncomfortable silence. But Conrad had already moved to the next execution. He crossed the ballroom with measured strides, stopped in front of Vivian Ashford, and extended the sealed envelope with the formality of someone serving a legal summons. My mother took it automatically. Her hands trembled so violently the envelope nearly slipped from her grasp. She tore it open, withdrew the single page. Her eyes moved across the text. I watched her face cycle through emotions, confusion, denial, comprehension, absolute panic. Asset forfeiture pursuant to cross guarantee. Her voice rose, climbing toward hysteria. This is 30 years of our family's sweat. You cannot. The restaurant chain operated under cross guarantee with Sterling Caldwell's Apex Capital Fund, Conrad said, tone unchanged. That fund is now forfeit. The guarantee executes automatically. Your signature authorized this arrangement on March 12, 2023. March. My mother stared at the paper, then at Conrad, then at me. But that was... Sterling said it was insurance. He said the cross guarantee protected us from market volatility. He said, he lied. I said from the stage, my voice carrying across the ballroom. The cross guarantee made your restaurant chain collateral for his fund. When his fund forfeited, your chain forfeited with it. You signed the papers. Beckett warned you about the risk. You signed anyway. Beckett stood beside our mother, face pale but composed. He was not reading the notice. He was looking directly at me for the first time all evening, and his expression held no surprise, no anger. Just quiet resignation of someone who had seen this coming for 3 years. My mother turned to him. You said the risk was minimal. You said, I said the risk was catastrophic, Beckett corrected quietly. I told you not to sign. You said I was being paranoid. You said Sterling was family, that he would never let us fail. Vivian's hand crushed the forfeiture notice. Her diamond collar caught the chandelier light. 30 years of building a restaurant chain, and all of it was written on a single page she had signed without reading because Sterling Caldwell had called it insurance. Liora! She cried, turning toward the stage, desperation stripping away the last of her upper-class composure. Liora, you are my flesh and blood. You cannot do this to your own mother. I looked down at her from the podium, my expression unreadable. 3 years ago, when I was drowning in debt and humiliation, you told me I was a stain on the family name and demanded I disappear. You only remember my true name now because the cameras are rolling, the press is watching, and your financial security has turned to ash. Tears cut deep paths down her face, completely destroying her carefully applied makeup. 30 years of building her restaurant chain, and all of it was reduced to a single page she had signed without reading because she was entirely convinced she could not lose. My mother sank to her knees, her champagne-colored gown pooling around her like spilled wine on the marble floor. Beckett stood beside her, looking directly at me for the first time all evening. His expression held no surprise, no anger, just the quiet resignation of a brother who had seen this ending coming for 3 long years. I knew what I was signing, he said quietly. I just didn't have the courage to refuse her. That's on me, not you. I held his gaze and nodded once. Understanding, acceptance. There was no room left for forgiveness, only the acknowledgement that the bill had finally come due. I turned away from them and walked directly toward the private executive elevator. My heels clicked heavily against the stone, a final rhythmic punctuation to our history. Behind me, my mother's frantic screams echoed off the high Art Deco ceilings, but I didn't halt. I had spent far too many years waiting for people who never once stopped for me. The sleet cut like razors, and Sterling Caldwell ran toward my town car with his palms raised, and for the first time in 3 years I saw him beg. The elevator had delivered me to the underground garage. My driver had the engine running, black town car idling near the exit, exhaust visible in freezing November air. I walked across concrete and slid into the back seat without looking back. But Sterling had found another exit, Down the grand staircase, through the lobby, out into the night where sleet fell like broken glass and paparazzi flashbulbs turned everything into strobing white. He reached my car just as it rolled toward the iron gates, slamming his open palms violently against the tinted glass of my rear window. I signaled my driver to halt, pushed the door open, and stepped back out into the storm. Sterling stood right in front of me, completely drenched, his custom tuxedo ruined as he collapsed forward to his knees. For the first time in 3 years, the arrogance was entirely gone from his eyes. I was looking at a man who finally knew how to beg. Liora, I was a blind fool. That woman poisoned my head. He pressed forward, completely exposed to the freezing air, every strand of wet hair plastered to his forehead. For the sake of what we used to have, give me a job as a janitor. I will scrub floors. I will do anything. Don't let them put me in a cell. And then he struck his own face. Once, twice, 3 times. Open-palmed slaps that turned his cheek red and made the paparazzi strobe lights ignite with renewed frenzy. Manufacturing remorse for an audience that would never buy the performance. Creating optics of a man destroyed by guilt rather than consequences. Please! He screamed, tears mixing with sleet. Please, I'm begging you! The man who had placed a red pen in my face 3 years ago and told me I was too stupid to understand contracts was now hitting himself and begging for a janitor position right in front of me. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no triumph. Just cold understanding that this was exactly what begging looked like when it came 3 years too late and for entirely the wrong reasons. 2 more figures reached us. My mother appeared first, her champagne gown soaked through diamond collar catching flashbulbs as she lunged toward me. Liora. It was our fault. Save the restaurants. We're your family. We're ending up on the sidewalk. Beckett appeared beside her, silent, his tuxedo dark with rain. Unlike Sterling and our mother, he was not screaming into the November night. He simply stood 3 feet back, straight-spined, in the freezing sleet, and met my eyes. He did not kneel, did not beg. He offered one tiny honest nod, a quiet acknowledgement that the bill had come due, and he understood exactly why. I nodded back. One movement, smaller than his, but enough for him to understand that I saw the difference between his dignity and their desperation. Then I reached into my pocket and withdrew the red pen. The same pen Sterling had used 3 years ago when he placed it in my face and told me to sign divorce papers. I held it up so they could all see it clearly under the flashing cameras, then I dropped it straight down into the freezing slush at their feet. 3 years ago. I said, my voice level and cold. You told me I was a maid lacking status. 3 years later, I bought the table you ate from. But my properties have a strict policy against hiring garbage. Sterling's scream started before I finished. No, no, Liora, please. I turned my back on them, stepped back into the warmth of the town car, and pulled the heavy door shut. The mechanical seal cut off his final screams, instantly reducing his panic to complete silence. I tapped the partition. My driver nodded and pressed the accelerator. The car pulled away from the curb, tires hissing on wet pavement. Behind us, the flashbulbs exploded in continuous strobe, documenting every second of their collapse for tomorrow's headlines. The red pen hit the frozen slush. 3 years ago, it was a weapon pointed at my face. Tonight, it is a punctuation mark at the end of a very long sentence. The period that says finished. Sterling's voice faded behind the exhaust. Mother's screaming became white noise. Even Beckett's dignified silence receded into the November darkness that swallowed everything behind tinted glass. The driver turned left onto the main boulevard. Streetlights blurred past in amber streaks. The hotel disappeared from view, and with it the ballroom where I had revealed myself, the stage where I had spoken the truth, the marble floor where Sterling and my mother had collapsed under the weight of their own signatures. 3 years, 15 properties, 800 employees, 1 night of reckoning, and now it is finished. I didn't turn to look through the rear glass, but I knew the exact sounds behind exhaust pipes, what people do when the floor turns to ash, scream louder as if volume could rewrite reality. The phone rang at 7 in the morning, and Conrad Whitfield said 3 words that told me the world had learned everything. Front page, all 3. I sat up in bed, Manhattan skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, November sunrise, painting the city in shades of amber and steel. The car had delivered me home 12 hours earlier. I had showered, changed, and slept for the first time in 3 days without dreaming. Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, New York Post. Conrad continued, his voice carrying the professional satisfaction of someone who had executed a perfect legal maneuver. Chairman Vance's unmasked discarded wife who swallowed hospitality empire. They're running the full story. The cross guarantee, the FBI arrests, the forfeiture clause. Everything. And Sterling, I asked? 8-second clip is viral. 14 million views in 11 hours. His face going from smug to sheet-white terror when you stepped through the curtain. Your mother charging the stage hit 2 million streams before midnight. Solene Sarah Higgins remanded without bail. 3-state warrant executed simultaneously across Chicago, Miami, and Houston field offices. Apex Capital assets consolidated and transferred. The corporate registry logged the final asset seizure at 8:47 p.m. last night. I walked to my laptop, opened the browser, found the clip. There it was. 8 seconds. Sterling's face in the moment of recognition. Confusion dissolving into disbelief, dissolving into the terrible understanding that his ex-wife was standing on the stage where Chairman Vance should be. The champagne glass falling. Crystal shattering against marble. His mouth opening in a shape that looked like drowning. I watched it once, then closed the tab. I would never open it again. Not because it brought me pain, because it brought me nothing at all. No triumph, no vindication, no warmth. Just the clean, quiet absence of something that had occupied 3 years of my life and was now finally finished. Liora! Conrad's voice pulled me back. The board wants a statement. Press is requesting interviews. I can schedule. No statement, I said. No interviews. The story speaks for itself. Understood. I heard the slight shift in his tone that meant he approved. One more thing. Your brother called my office this morning. He asked if you would be willing to meet for coffee. I looked at the Manhattan skyline. 16 stories below, the city was waking up. People heading to work, lives continuing as if the world had not shifted on its axis last night. Taxis and delivery trucks, and the relentless human machinery of a city that had no interest in anyone's personal reckoning. Tell him yes, I said. I set the phone down and stood at the window for a long moment. Outside, a November wind pushed dead leaves across the plaza below. A woman walked her dog. A man in a gray coat hailed a cab. Ordinary life moving forward with complete indifference to what had happened inside a ballroom the night before. 3 years ago, I had walked out of the Legacy Hotel with a security badge placed on a reception counter and the cold November air hitting my face like a verdict. I had told myself that night, remember exactly where you are standing. Remember this floor. Remember this cold. You will need to know how far you have come. I remembered. 3 days later, I sat across from Beckett Ashford in a quiet cafe, 6 blocks from Vance Hotel Group headquarters. He ordered black coffee. I ordered tea. He arrived 2 minutes early. I noticed that. He had his hands flat on the table when I walked in, not checking his phone, not pretending to be occupied. Just sitting there, waiting, ready to accept whatever I decided to give him. We sat in silence for 30 seconds before he spoke. I always knew you would build something massive, he said, not looking at me, staring at his coffee cup instead. I was just too much of a coward to say it out loud. I held my tea, feeling the warmth through ceramic. You tried to warn Mother about the cross guarantee, I said. She didn't listen, he said. She never listened to anyone who told her no. Neither did Sterling. No, Beckett agreed. Neither did he. He finally looked up. His eyes carried the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent months watching a disaster approach and had been powerless or unwilling to stop it. I recognized that exhaustion. I had worn it myself once in the corner of a ballroom with a clipboard watching my husband fall in love with someone else on stage. I watched the clip this morning, he said quietly. The 8 seconds. I watched it 4 times. And you looked exactly like Dad, he said. Same stillness. Same patience. He used to say that the most dangerous person in any room was the one who had already decided what they were going to do and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. I did not trust myself to speak for a moment. He would have been proud, Beckett said. Not of the revenge, of the 80 people, of Vernon Hayes, of the foundation, of the fact that you counted everyone in the blast radius before you pulled the trigger. I wrapped both hands around my tea. The warmth traveled up my palms and into my wrists, and I let it sit there. "I'm sorry," Beckett said. "I know those words are inadequate. I know saying I was afraid doesn't change anything. But I am saying it because it is true, and because you deserve to hear the truth from me at least once, without it being too late to matter." I looked at him across the small cafe table, my brother, the boy who used to walk me home from school, the man who had stood in a hotel lobby in an expensive suit with his eyes on the floor while our mother called me a stain. The person who had signed a document he knew was dangerous because he lacked the courage to refuse her in that moment. He was not evil, he had never been evil. He was simply someone who loved safety more than he loved doing the right thing. And in the end, that choice had cost him everything it was supposed to protect. "I know," I said. Before we left, I took his business card, wrote a name and number on the back. Director of Hospitality Executive Search, someone who owed me a favor and had been waiting for a chance to repay it. "They're hiring," I said. "If you want a fresh start." Beckett took the card, looked at it for a long moment, then met my eyes. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," I said. "You will have to earn it, the same as everyone else." He nodded once. That was enough. I nodded back. Then I left the cafe and walked the 6 blocks back to my office alone through the November cold, past the street vendors and the construction scaffolding and the ordinary beautiful chaos of a city that kept moving regardless of what any one person had lost or found. 2 weeks passed. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it reviewing expansion blueprints for Chicago, eating takeout at my desk, watching the city from the 42nd floor, while families gathered in apartments below and the smell of someone's cooking drifted up through the ventilation. It was not lonely. It was quiet. There is a difference, and I had spent 3 years learning to tell them apart. Christmas Eve arrived, and my phone stayed dark. No call from my mother was expected, none received. I felt no pain, just the quiet hum of work, continuing the clean satisfaction of building something that would outlast the people who said it could not be built. I thought about my mother sometimes, not with anger. Anger had burned itself out somewhere between the 4th and 5th property acquisition. What remained was something closer to clarity. She had loved status more than she loved her daughter. That was not a wound I needed to keep reopening. It was simply a fact I had accepted and filed away the way you file away a contract that has expired and no longer governs anything. December closed with the Vance Educational Foundation charter finalized. Mission statement typed in clean sans serif on cream paper, the same quality paper my grandmother used for her lesson plans. For those told their room to breathe must remain small. I signed the charter with the steel pen I kept in the wooden box on my desk, not the red pen. The red pen was at the bottom of a freezing slush puddle somewhere outside the hotel garage, and that was exactly where it belonged. This is what the other side looks like. Not champagne and celebration. Just coffee with the one family member who was honest silence from the one who never was, and blueprints for Chicago glowing on a screen at midnight. Quiet, clean, mine. May 2025 arrived with spring rain and the final renovation completion on the Ashford Hotel, the property where everything had started. I stood in the main lobby on a Tuesday afternoon while the last construction crew packed up their equipment and the first guests of the new season moved through the front doors. Vernon Hayes ran the executive kitchen now. Every single person from the destroyed restaurant chain had received offers and 73 had accepted. The others had found positions elsewhere with references I provided personally. I thought of David Lauren's daughters in Chicago teenagers when their father lost everything to the same woman fatherless by March of that year. I could not give them back what Sarah Higgins took, but I could make sure 80 other families never knew what that kind of loss felt like. That was not justice. Not really. Justice would have meant David Lauren was still alive to see his daughters grow up. What I had done was something smaller and more possible. I had made sure the next set of names on her list never made it onto the page. I walked through the completed lobby, slowly checking details that most owners would delegate. Fresh flowers in crystal vases, marble floors polished to mirror shine, staff in crisp uniforms greeting guests with the kind of genuine warmth that cannot be manufactured, only hired and trusted and given the conditions to grow. A young woman at the front desk looked up as I passed and smiled. She had been a line cook at my mother's Midtown branch 6 months ago. Now she was learning hospitality management on a structured training program Conrad had helped me design. She did not know who I was beyond Chairman Vance. She did not need to. I smiled back and kept walking. Then I took the elevator to the second floor, room 214. The exact room where Sterling had stayed 14 times. The room listed in the guest registry I had found on the day I bought this building, his name written in neat hotel script over and over, never once accompanied by his wife's name. I opened the door with my master key. The room had been renovated completely. New furniture, new linens, new everything. Fresh paint on the walls, the color of early morning fog over the Hudson. The window overlooked the same courtyard it always had, but the courtyard itself had been redesigned, new stone, new plantings, a small fountain that caught the May light and scattered it across the walls. I walked to the nightstand, opened the drawer. A silver wedding band lay inside, abandoned, forgotten. Sterling's ring left behind in the chaos of the gala night, or perhaps thrown away in anger somewhere between the ballroom and the garage, or simply lost in the wreckage of a life that had collapsed in a single evening and never been reconstructed. I picked it up, held it to the light, read the inscription inside the band, the words pressed into the metal in small, careful letters, "Forever begins tonight." I turned it once in my fingers. 3 years ago, that inscription had meant something to me. I had believed it the way you believe things when you are 24 years old and standing at an altar, and the future looks like a door opening rather than a wall closing. Now it just looked like a sentence that had never been true for even one day of the marriage it was supposed to define. I placed it in the lost and found log on the nightstand, wrote the date, wrote the room number, left it for whoever was responsible for such things. Some things are meant to stay lost. I left the room and let the heavy door click shut behind me, the sound traveling down the corridor and fading into the ordinary sounds of a hotel, doing what hotels do, containing lives briefly, and then releasing them. I took the stairs back down to the lobby, walked out through the front doors into the May rain, stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my face tilted up toward the sky, letting the cold water hit my cheeks the way the November air had hit them 3.5 years ago on a different sidewalk outside a different hotel, with nothing but a security badge left behind on a counter, and $180,000 in a blind trust I had not yet learned to use. Full circle is not triumph. It is simply returning to the wound and realizing the scar has made you stronger than the cut. That night, I returned to my private apartment in the penthouse of the Vance flagship property. I opened the wooden box I kept on my desk. Father's letters written in careful handwriting before cancer took his strength. The ink slightly faded now from 3 years of being read and refolded and read again. Grandmother Helen Vance's photograph, black and white, her face serious and kind, the face of a woman who spent 40 years teaching mathematics to children whose parents could barely afford textbooks and never once asked for a monument in return. A clean steel pen I used for signing major acquisitions. A Polaroid of Beckett and me from years ago, taken at a family dinner before everything broke, both of us laughing at something I could no longer remember, his arm around my shoulder, the image slightly overexposed in the way that old Polaroids sometimes were, as if the light had been too much for the moment to contain. I placed the box on my nightstand where I could see it. Then I lay back in the darkness, tracking shadows across the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the city, 16 stories below. They told me I was nothing but a maid. Perhaps they were right. A maid understands exactly how to clear wreckage and make a space clean. Occasionally, that is precisely what this world requires. And to you listening, remember this: those who call you worthless today may beg at your door tomorrow. Looking back on 3 years building my empire, I won't lie. Revenge consumed me. Every acquisition, every move toward justice came at a cost. I lost time I can never recover. Don't make my mistake of letting betrayal define your next chapter. Rebuild for yourself, not against someone else. Here's what I learned: dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. When Sterling called me a maid, he thought he was defining my worth. But worth isn't determined by the cruelest voice, it's determined by what you build when no one's watching. I believe God walked me through that betrayal for a reason. It became clear when I stood in that ballroom I wasn't there for revenge. I was there to show 80 families that someone believed in their dignity. That's real justice. So tell me, did I take this too far? Should I have shown mercy? Drop a comment below. If this story moved you, please share it. And if you're new here, subscribe to Her Drama Stories for more lessons about resilience and rebuilding after betrayal. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time matters. Final reminder, this story includes fictionalized elements for reflection. What matters most is the message about dignity. God bless you.